After watching Empresses in the Palace 800 times, I started feeling like everyone was out to get me in a palace power struggle. On the nth day of my time travel, I spent the night having my mother help me recruit 20 maids. My cousin, who wanted to frame me for a secret rendezvous with a man, was surrounded by my maids. She couldn't even get close enough to touch my hand. So furious, she ground 3 of her teeth to dust. On the nth day of entering the palace, I dug 3 feet deep into the ground within a 10-mile radius of my palace. Even the 10-mile radius beyond that, the musk that had long been hidden in the Empress Dowager's palace was all unearthed by me. The noble consort who wanted to frame me was so angry she couldn't even eat. For the next 3 years in the palace, I countered every god and Buddha I met. I anticipated everyone's predictions, until the novel's protagonist, the Emperor's destined one, entered the palace. She acted all weak and delicate as she led me to the lakeside, intent on performing a scene where I framed her, to grab the Emperor's attention. However, as she grabbed my hand and fell backward, the triumphant look on her face shattered instantly. Wait, no. Are you out of your mind? The lake in our manor is just painted on. Lin Wanyin touched the hard, sandy ground beneath her in disbelief, over and over again. Where's the water in this lake? Drained. I hid behind my maid, and naturally wiped my hands with a handkerchief. A place like a lake is a hotspot for framing people. How could I not have filled it in? Although the Emperor didn't seem too happy about it, he said he'd never seen a palace without a lake. There was no choice. I had to pay a high price to find an artist to painstakingly paint an artificial lake. Lin Wanyin stared at the sand on the ground in a daze for a long time. After a while, it was as if she had made up her mind. She pinched herself and looked at me with teary, pleading eyes. Empress, why would you? A beauty shedding tears, like a blossom in the rain. But I sighed softly and interrupted her anyway. Stop acting. The Emperor isn't coming. Ever since this artificial lake was built, he has always walked the long way around. Honestly, I think it looks just like the real thing. I don't know why he just can't accept it. With that said, I skillfully ordered the eunuchs and palace maids to pull her up. Then I had 8 imperial physicians check her physical condition. After making sure there were no omissions, I energetically began my daily itinerary. First, I conducted a thorough search of my own palace. I even pulled out the soil in the flower pots and sifted through it. Second, I conducted a thorough search of the emperors, the empress dowagers, and the noble consorts' palaces, making sure there was no musk hidden in any corners, no poison, or voodoo dolls sewn by my own hands. Although, to prevent others from framing me, I never do any needlework, but it is better to be safe than sorry. By the time all this was done, it was already noon. The palace maid I sent specifically to watch Lin Wanyin ran back, reporting to me that Lin Wanyin still managed to have an accidental encounter with the emperor, but it seems the emperor didn't have much interest in her face, which was 70% similar to his white moonlight first love. He was, in fact, quite annoyed. Lin Wanyin looked completely baffled, not knowing why things turned out this way. But I knew. Ha ha ha. From the moment I entered the palace, I found out that the emperor had a first love who died young. In palace intrigue novels, this is the forbidden topic in the emperor's heart. She is that pivotal person who, even with a 30% resemblance, would make the emperor go crazy, completely unable to control himself. So I brought 300 women into the palace, who all bore a resemblance to his first love. I arranged for him to meet one by accident every day. When he met the first one, the emperor was overjoyed and promoted her to a consort on the spot. When he met the second one, the emperor was overjoyed and promoted her to a consort on the spot. By the time he met the 299th one, the emperor threw up. I heard that even in his dreams he was begging his first love to let him go. Therefore, Lin Wanyin lost the moment she looked like his first love. But the women in palace intrigue novels never give up. She practiced the Jinghong dance tirelessly, determined to steal the show at the emperor's birthday banquet. I heard her boasting to her maidservant, "This Jinghong dance is a legendary centuries-old lost masterpiece. Today I will surely catch the emperor's eye. I will stun him with my performance." The Jinghong dance was indeed so difficult it had been lost to time. In the previous dynasty, any dancer who knew it was cherished as a rare treasure. What's more, Lin Wanyin had a graceful figure. When she stood in the center of the grand hall in her red dress, the flickering candlelight seemed to dim in her presence. I snacked on melon seeds, admiring her exquisite movements, until I eventually forgot to keep eating. As the dance ended, she bowed elegantly, softly revealing her slender neck. Her eyes filled with certainty of victory. No man had ever been able to resist such a brilliant and enchanting woman, and the emperor was no exception. But Lin Wanyin waited a long time without hearing the emperor's ecstatic praise. She looked up in confusion, and upon doing so, she met the emperor's dark, shadowed gaze. There was no joy on his face at all. He looked grim and deathly serious. His voice was laced with suspicion. The dances of the previous dynasty have been lost for so long. How do you know it? Speak. What is your connection to the rebels of the previous dynasty? Lin Wanyin collapsed to the ground, her face turning deathly pale. She couldn't understand why, after simply performing a dance, she was being suspected of being a remnant of the previous dynasty. I closed the script in my hand, content with my subtle handiwork. Generally speaking, the heroine of a palace intrigue novel always has a special skill. Either it is a long-lost embroidery technique, or singing, or dancing. There are too many lost arts out there. I really couldn't predict which one she'd have, so I simply had someone write 10 stories about princesses of fallen kingdoms trying to restore their rule, then bribe the eunuchs close to the emperor to read them to him every day. These stories basically covered all the skills, but they all shared one core message. Anyone who knows those long-lost ancient dances must be a remnant of the former dynasty, a spy, a threat to his throne. Actually, I originally wanted to write 100 of them, but the emperor is naturally too suspicious. 10 were more than enough. Lin Wanyin was dragged away by the emperor's guards, although it was later proven that she had merely taken in a former dynasty dancer to curry favor. The emperor still stripped her of all her ranks, demoting her to the lowest class of concubine. Lin Wanyin was devastated for a while. She felt as if some bad omen in the palace was targeting her. Everything had been so bizarre ever since she entered the palace. But a palace drama heroine is still a palace drama heroine. She quickly pulled herself together, after copying Confucian scriptures, pretending to be a devout believer, and trying to cozy up to the Empress Dowager with mementos to no avail, after which she was even beaten up. She simply drugged the emperor and slept with him. The whole process I listened to with great interest, marveling at every twist, until 2 months later, news spread that Lin Wanyin was pregnant. Do you know what a child is in a palace drama? It is a ladder for the heroine to climb up the ranks, a crucial tool for framing others, and a major event that can directly bring down an empress. Out of 100 palace drama heroines, 99 of them climb to the top by giving birth. Out of 100 palace dramas, 99 empresses are deposed because they were framed for harming a favorite concubine's child. Lin Wanyin suddenly felt she was back in the game, although the emperor only promoted her one step up. If this baby happens to be a prince, then her status will instantly change. With high spirits, she approached 2 high-ranking concubines, seeking an alliance and protection. Unsurprisingly, she was kicked out. She then cautiously got her hands on some musk, planning to frame someone for sabotage. The day I went to deliver a congratulatory gift, her eyes were sparkling with a combative light, practically locked onto me, but I kept 10 meters away from her. Dozens of palace maids formed a human wall between us. We even had to relay our words through others. After shouting a few times, she grew weary and gave up. Just then, I smiled and presented my gift. Looking at the massive gift covered in red cloth outside the door, her eyes lit up in an instant. She looked over, delicate and full of anticipation. This concubine thanks the empress. I shall keep this gift by my bed and worship it day and night. This time, it was my turn to be stunned. By your bed? Are you sure? She nodded firmly. I am sure. Very well. I didn't insist otherwise, and ordered them to unveil the red cloth. Lin Wanyin looked over with excitement. However, upon seeing what was beneath the cloth, the smile on her face froze. A rockery made of countless pieces of white jade, 3 meters long and 2 meters high, appeared before everyone. The surface was adorned with white jade shards, forming an ugly few character. More importantly, one could see through the rockery. Every single impurity was clearly visible. There was absolutely no place to hide anything inside it. I cast a complicated look around her cramped bedroom. Lady Lin, you've put much thought into this, but it would be better to keep this outside. She gritted her teeth. Very well. Rest assured, Empress. I will still worship it every day. That will do. I didn't pay it much mind, and turned to summon 10 imperial physicians. I had them assess it based on pharmacology, medical principles, and feng shui, to see if the rockery could cause a miscarriage. The result, of course, was that it could not. Lin Wanyin bit her lip hard, head bowed, wondering what scheme she might hatch next. Right then I stuck out my tongue, and under the gaze of everyone, licked the rockery. This time, her eyes widened in complete shock. I paid her no mind. I licked every side of it. Under her dazed gaze, I offered a slight smile. Lady Lin, you are with child after all, so you must be careful with what you keep. Now that I have tasted this rockery today, you can set your mind at ease. Afterward, I hadn't gone far from her quarters when I heard a thud behind me. Lin Wanyin had actually been angered into fainting. Her emotional resilience is truly poor. Giving gifts is a burden I have no choice but to bear. After all, I am the legal mother to all the children in the harem. It wouldn't look good if I didn't send gifts, and the emperor would have something to say about it. But sending gifts is such an easy way to be framed, so I hit upon the idea of gifting rockeries. Regardless of which concubine gets pregnant, I always send the exact same rockery. The incident of Lin Wanyin fainting was just a small interlude in the palace. The emperor didn't care. The empress dowager didn't care. And I didn't really care much either. However, I heard that afterward, the noble consort, Shu, and the consort Xian all followed my lead and each sent her a rockery. Lin Wanyin now feels nauseated the moment she sees a rockery. She claimed to be unwell and declined all visits from any other concubines. She has been quietly recuperating in her palace, but I know she certainly won't give up so easily. Sure enough, as she neared her delivery date, my next trial arrived. Lin Wanyin had been poisoned. The baby was premature. The midwife had vanished without a trace, and her water had broken. She was on the verge of death. According to palace rules, whenever a concubine goes into labor, the empress dowager and I must both be present. Lin Wanyin's labor was no exception. I quickly summoned the backup midwife I had prepared in advance, and snatched 2 slices of ginseng from the Empress Dowager to save her life. In the end, Lin Wanyin successfully gave birth to twins. The first thing she did after giving birth was to hold her children and weep weakly before the Emperor and the Empress Dowager. She tearfully accused me. The Empress is jealous that I am with child, and intentionally mistreated me while I was pregnant. The meals sent from the imperial kitchen were nothing but cold porridge and buns. I had originally thought it best to endure it, but today, the midwife arranged by the empresses disappeared at the very moment I was at my weakest. It is clear the empress wants to take both my life and my child's. If it had been just a moment later, my child would never have seen this world. Lin Wanyin wept bitterly, her face wet with tears. She appeared completely heartbroken. Furthermore, she had given birth to a precious pair of twins. For many emperors, a single prince is already a great treasure, let alone the fact that she had produced 2, a pair of dragons and phoenixes combined with the royal bloodline, and coupled with that display outside. The clouds glowing like fire, always regarded as an auspicious omen. She truly had every advantage stacked in her favor. Several palace maids brought from her maiden family knelt down and began to cry along with her. It was a scene of utmost pitifulness. They took out the unfinished meal from the side, and sobbing placed it before the emperor. They recounted just how miserable Lin Wanyin had been during these days. The emperor's expression turned grim. The empress dowager's expression was even grimmer. Lin Wanyin straightened her back, looking at me without a hint of fear. Empress, do you have anything you wish to explain? I shook my head. As for this matter, I truly have no evidence. Seeing me shake my head, Lin Wanyin's eyes filled with the excitement of pulling me down from my position. She held her child, knelt on the ground before the emperor and the empress dowager, and kowtowed 3 times hard enough for the sound to echo. I ask for nothing else. I only beg the emperor and the empress dowager to grant me justice and punish the mastermind who almost harmed my child. My own life is unimportant, but the royal bloodline is precious. Empress, you must pay the price for this. I could not help but point to myself, me. Her eyes were burning with a wild fire. Deep down, they were filled with the thrill of a successful scheme. Under her intense gaze, I used my folding fan to cover my face, smiling until my face nearly cramped. I bit my lip, afraid to laugh out loud. Lin Wanyin looked up and knocked her head against the floor twice more. She looked at the emperor, looking pitiful and vulnerable, attempting to harm the royal heir. A capital offense. Your Majesty, how do you think she should be punished? Under her expectant gaze, the emperor opened his mouth, but stayed silent for a long time. He only rubbed his temples wearily. He looked at Lin Wanyin, then looked at the world around him, and remained silent for a long while, unable to speak. Lin Wanyin was confused. Lin Wanyin was baffled. Lin Wanyin thought the emperor had some unavoidable reason for finding it hard to punish me. She gritted her teeth and emphasized again the importance of the imperial prince, and emphasized again the near-death experience she had endured. Regardless of who tries to harm the royal heir, they must be punished. No official would shelter a criminal who harms the royal bloodline. Finally, it was the Empress Dowager who spoke first. She looked up at the sky and down at the ground, and after a long silence, she let out a weary sigh. Are you saying that I, in my love for my own grandson, intended to punish myself? The anger on Lin Wanyin's face turned into confusion. What? The person I want to punish is clearly the Empress. The Empress Dowager gave her a listless look. But from the supplies for your pregnancy, your daily meals, to the midwives for your delivery, every single thing was handled personally by me. All princes in the palace are treated this way. As for the Empress, besides sending that stone, she did nothing at all. The Empress is ill. She breaks out in a rash whenever she sees a pregnant woman, vomits, breaks out in hives, and foams at the mouth. But as the Empress is the mother of the nation, to preserve the dignity of the royal family, this matter has never been told to anyone. Not even many of the concubines in the palace know about it. I had to take over the daily affairs of all pregnant concubines in the palace. The midwife was my own person. I have even personally inspected their daily meals. If those two things were true, then I am the only one who could have done it. Lin Wanyin's face turned deathly pale, as if she had seen a ghost. She opened her mouth. Your servant didn't mean it that way, but perhaps it was a misunderstanding on my part. I was just too anxious regarding the imperial heirs. The Empress Dowager did not speak again, merely waving her hand wearily. She prepared to depart and returned to the palace immediately. Lin Wanyin stood up, stumbling a few steps to catch up, attempting to place the wailing child before the Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager, this is your grandson. Listen, they want their grandmother to hold them. Even if I did have a misunderstanding, this child is truly of the imperial bloodline. This is your own grandson. These words failed to hold the Empress Dowager back. Instead, upon hearing them, the Empress Dowager seemed to stoop even lower. Lin Wanyin turned her tear-streaked, pale face toward the Emperor. Your Majesty, if I have no merit, I have at least suffered for this. But the Emperor had no intention of holding the child either. He waved his hand, summoning several wet nurses with a weary sigh. Enough. Take the 34th prince and 28th princess to the nursery. What was that? This time, Lin Wanyin was truly stunned. She seemed unable to comprehend the current situation. Her eyes were wide open, not even reacting when the child in her arms was taken away by the nurses. She muttered to herself, what does 34th prince and 28th princess mean? I passed by and kindly answered her. It means exactly what it sounds like. It means His Majesty already has 34 princes and 28 princesses. The light faded from her eyes, as if she had lost her purpose in life. She kept repeating it over and over. How can this be? How can this be? I shrugged my shoulders. What's so impossible about it? It's common knowledge, isn't it? In palace intrigue novels, the emperor always struggles to produce heirs. At least that's how it is before the female lead appears. Otherwise, how could the protagonist's child ever compete among dozens of other princes? Under normal circumstances, the male lead in a palace intrigue story has no issue with fertility. The only reason he doesn't have children is usually because he is being plotted against by the empress, or is too hung up on his white moonlight to care about the harem. So I grasped the key point. I sent 300 of his white moonlight lookalikes into the palace, and fearing he might get bored, I also found 100 others, passionate ones, indifferent ones, the scholarly type, those who like wearing white, those who like purple, and all sorts of women with unique charms. I was even worried he might develop an odd aesthetic, so I included the plump dumpling-like ones, the bone-thin ones, the heavily freckled ones, and even remarried women the same age as the Empress Dowager. I gave him one of everything. Besides, the emperor is wealthy, he can afford it. In this era, marrying anyone is inferior to marrying the son of heaven. That period in the harem was truly 100 flowers in full bloom. Wherever you looked, there were pregnant concubines. When the first concubine got pregnant, I made up an excuse that I had a strange illness and put on a show in public. The Empress Dowager, quite naturally, secretly took over the task of looking after the pregnant concubines. When the first child of the harem was born, the emperor and the Empress Dowager were beaming with joy. They couldn't keep their hands off the baby. When the second child of the harem was born, the emperor and the Empress Dowager were beaming with joy. They were all love and kindness toward the child. When the 50th child of the harem was born, the emperor fell silent. He asked, "Can't we stop these concubines from giving birth?" But the number of concubines was just too large. The emperor decided to take contraceptives himself, but before the medicine even touched his lips, the ministers threw themselves down before him, insisting that the imperial person must not be harmed. If he dared to drink it, they would all castrate themselves. Never, in any history book, have so many ministers threatened to become eunuchs for the emperor. The emperor went silent. The emperor smashed his bowl. The emperor was completely helpless against them. Latter, he endured what he could, and when he could no longer bear it, he would send a bowl of contraceptive decoction every time he visited a concubine. But there were still those who slipped through the cracks, and concubines who refused to drink the medicine. For example, Lin Wanyin. The Empress Dowager's back once so straight, became weary. They were at their wits' end with the 50 or 60 children in the palace. One complained the allowance was too small, another claimed her food had been poisoned, and someone else claimed a concubine was trying to harm her child. In the end, I was the one who proposed setting up a nursery in the palace to keep all the princes and princesses together, to make them easier to manage. The Empress Dowager wouldn't say it, but this was already the 21st time she had been framed. Ha ha ha. This time, Lin Wanyin was quiet for a long while. Just when I thought she had given up, she reignited her fighting spirit. This time, I was truly curious. Given, framing me to get me hurt is out. I've guarded against that far too well. Given, framing me for infidelity is out. Because even when I go to the restroom, I have 10 maids guarding the door. Given, seducing the emperor is out. Because the emperor has become desensitized to women. Given, getting close to the Empress Dowager is out. The Empress Dowager has reached the point of getting a headache just seeing her. Given, having children is also out. Because there are simply too many children in the inner palace. With all these avenues failed, what other tricks could she possibly use to climb the ladder? I found out soon enough. She transformed herself into a virtuous minister. The flooding in the Jiangnan region returns every few years. It has always been the emperor's most troubling concern. She submitted her own strategy anonymously, while carelessly leaving behind a tiny, identifiable mark that revealed her identity. In the end, her proposal was chosen by the emperor, successfully resolving the flooding issue. The emperor was overjoyed, offering full recognition and praise for her intellect. He even promoted her in rank. Lin Wanyin truly possessed all the traits of a palace drama heroine. Erudite, helping the emperor solve his biggest headache, yet never asking for credit. She would even take a step back each time, and refused any rewards, as if she didn't dare to care or wasn't concerned, but did it out of concern for the emperor, unable to bear seeing the emperor so burdened. So she worked tirelessly to offer her counsel. This time, she played the right card. Her performance quickly captured the emperor's heart. Her rank rose all the way from a low-level consort to noble consort. She even received a title, Noble Consort Hui. I certainly didn't expect this. I miscalculated. After many failed attempts, Lin Wanyin had finally achieved significant success. Now she walks with a triumphant air, looking at all the other concubines with disdain. But towards me, her biggest obstacle on the way up, she remains respectful, putting on a perfectly gentle and submissive act. Occasionally, when we meet at the nursery, she even gently teaches her child to call me Empress Mother. The emperor has sighed more than once about how clever she is. With a heart as pure as an orchid, I too have sighed more than once at her traits. But I know that being a noble consort is not her end goal, and neither is imperial noble consort. Every palace drama heroine has only one final target, and that is the phoenix throne beneath me. I won't yield, she won't stop. I know the direction of her attack against me has changed. The inner palace and the outer court are closely linked. She knows that fighting in the palace is useless, so she decided to stir up trouble in the outer court. As everyone knows, every empress in a palace intrigue novel comes from a remarkably prestigious family. I am no exception. My father is a great general, and my brothers are also great generals. The three of them command immense respect among the people. One might even say their merits have eclipsed their sovereign. That is why I fear the emperor harboring suspicions about my family, and I dare not interfere in any affairs of the outer court. If Lin Wanyin uses the outer court to move against me, I will have little power to resist. The outer court is far too restrictive for me, leaving me with almost no room to maneuver, especially since it is a common failing of emperors to be suspicious of every general. With my family holding so much military power, he has long wanted to take action against us. Lin Wanyin is like a pillow delivered just as he was starting to doze off. She conspired with the emperor, secretly intercepting the grain supplies meant for the border, and finding excuses to withhold military pay. It is the dead of winter, and the front line is left without money or food, suddenly finding themselves in a dire position. Just then, the Turks invaded once again. They are well-equipped and well-fed, while our border soldiers haven't received rations in a month. Even worse, someone leaked the defense plans of the border. In that battle, my father was defeated and even lost 3 cities. A general losing cities is a grave crime. Using this as a pretext, the emperor demanded my father and brother return to the capital and forbade them from bringing any troops. Anyone can see, my father is finished. My family is finished. I am confined to my quarters by the emperor, pacing in an anxious frenzy. For the first time in 2 years, a look of triumph finally appeared on Lin Wanyin's face. She wore robes far beyond her rank as a noble consort, and arrived at my palace in high spirits. Your Majesty, this look of yours is quite a rare sight. I still remember back then how very arrogant you were. It seems like everything I did was in vain. But now, Tell me, can you save the lives of your father and your 2 brothers? Guess what? Will they be cut in half at the waist or face some other gruesome execution? Don't worry. When the time comes, I'll describe every miserable detail of your father and brother's ends to you. I won't leave out a single thing. I've been eating nothing but thin, watery vegetable broth for days. My body is feeling a bit weak. I shot her a pale, listless look. I didn't say a word. Like a victorious rooster, she strutted away in triumph. On the day my father was supposed to return, she overstepped imperial protocol even further. She donned the phoenix robes that belonged to me and waited in battle formation at the city gate. She even sent a maid to provide me with real-time updates. Everyone was on high alert. The emperor was beside himself with excitement, but my father didn't return at all. In almost any court intrigue novel, a general summoned back by the emperor alone rarely meets a good end. My father has an army of 150,000 men. His influence rivals the throne, and he has immense support among the people. What kept him coming back was nothing more than his loyalty to the monarch, and his love for me, his hostage. I, the hostage, am temporarily capable of protecting myself. The only real obstacle is his loyalty to the emperor. Because the late emperor was once kind to him, my father is incredibly foolishly loyal. He is a stubborn old man. He would honor the late emperor's favor and willingly die for the current emperor. So I told him the emperor isn't the late emperor's kin at all. He is an imposter, as everyone knows in these stories. Many protagonists have a past that is hard to touch. As they say, know your enemy and know yourself to ensure victory. I knew deeply that my true opponent wasn't some concubine. It was the emperor himself, who held the power of life and death over me. In any case, thinking things through never hurts, so I carefully researched the emperor's life. According to my research, the emperor left the palace due to illness at the age of 12. There he met his long-lost love. They spent several years together. What bound them even closer was when the emperor was 15, when a palace concubine looking to eliminate rivals sent assassins to hunt him down. At the time, all the servants attending to him were killed, so he and his first love spent months on the run. In the end, his first love died shielding him from a blade. Therefore, between the ages of 12 and 16, everyone who saw him during those 4 years was killed. What if he was killed while being chased, or replaced by an imposter? That wouldn't be too far-fetched, right? I mean, is it possible that the prince didn't actually die, but rather he was just afraid to show his face? So, when I sent people to look for those 300 lookalikes of the emperor's first love, I also told them to keep an eye out for men who resembled the emperor and the late emperor. I carefully studied the late emperor's habits and traits. Then, I crafted a new emperor. He resembled the late emperor in my father's memory even more than the current one does, in every single way. When he first saw my fake evidence, my father didn't believe it, but that changed the moment he saw this man. He, like the late emperor, was allergic to osmanthus flowers. He, like the late emperor, suffered from a hereditary disease. His bearing and mannerisms were so much like the late emperor's. He would accidentally show the scars he suffered through all those years of hardship, the wounds from when he was being hunted. He would inadvertently mention how he wanted to pay respects to the late emperor, but didn't even dare to look from afar. He could only watch as that fraud played the tyrant in the palace. Call it manipulative if you want, but my father fell for it. Would he still be loyal to a fake son of the emperor? It is true that I find it hard to interfere with the imperial court, but I can certainly interfere with my father. My father led an army of 150,000 men, and openly expressed grave doubts about the emperor's identity, especially after seeing that cold, resilient prince who followed the late emperor's legacy. Everyone was stunned. The emperor, in order to frame my father, had deliberately cut off his grain and military supplies. Regarding that, all the ministers knew exactly what was going on. Meanwhile, that prince was steadfastly guarding the border amidst the war, defending the people with his own life. Covered in blood, his face full of determination. My imperial father once said, "Those who invade our borders must be destroyed, even if it costs me my life. I will never surrender these cities to these barbarians." Everyone has seen stories of real and fake heiresses plenty of times, but this is likely the first time you've ever seen a real and fake emperor. The emperor himself was completely stunned. He hardly had time to think about dealing with my father or dealing with me. He is currently running around everywhere, searching for evidence to prove his identity. But as I mentioned before, the people from back then were scrubbed out far too thoroughly, and even if any weren't finished off, I made sure they were. If he thinks he can find evidence, then I would have wasted all those hours watching empresses in the palace for nothing. As the saying goes, strike at the jugular. The very premise that allows him to openly question and resent my father for having power that overshadows the sovereign is that he must actually be that sovereign, now that he cannot even prove his own legitimate identity. Isn't that just hilarious? The emperor is in the palace, pacing back and forth in a panic. He went to find Lin Wanyin, but Lin Wanyin hadn't even grasped what was happening yet, and couldn't provide him with any strategy, so he came to find me. He begged me to testify to his identity. He must be at his wit's end. He wept as he recounted our years of marital affection, hoping to move me into acting as his witness. He even tried to vent my anger for me, stripping Lin Wanyin of all her titles again overnight. Lin Wanyin was absolutely livid, but I know that if I agreed to help him today, the same thing would just repeat itself in a few years. He would go back to targeting my father, targeting me, and targeting my entire family. Besides, I am the one pulling the strings behind this whole thing. If I were to agree to him now, then wouldn't all my hard work these past years be for nothing? That makes no sense at all. I politely indicated that he and I are not close, and regretfully declared that I am unable to assist. He grew desperate. Having heard of a folk method for identifying lineage through bones, he proposed to the imperial court that he would exhume the remains of the late emperor to prove his identity. This method is supposedly feasible. However, my prince brother burst into tears in front of everyone. I am the fake one. I admit that I am a fake father. The late emperor has already passed away. I beg of you, do not disturb his eternal rest any longer. He stumbled a step and knelt down in the direction of the imperial mausoleum. I don't want the status of a prince anymore. I don't want anything anymore. I only ask that you let my father know. Let the late emperor rest in peace. I would rather die than let anyone touch the late emperor's remains. The two of them, one tries every possible way to prove his identity, even going so far as to dig up his own father's bones, while the other would rather give up his status, all to ensure the late emperor's final rest remains undisturbed. The difference between them was immediately clear. The emperor hadn't even finished enjoying his triumph after hearing the confession that the other was a fake. When he heard what followed, he felt like getting down on his knees to kowtow along with him. This time, he truly had no way to defend himself. His head is about to explode. At this moment, some people bring up the hundreds of concubines he keeps in his palace, and others bring up his more than 60 children. They condemn his behavior as the height of extravagance and evil, and utterly shameless. The late emperor had few concubines, and few children. How did things mutate so drastically when it came to him? The emperor has no way to defend himself. The emperor was left speechless. Finally, the emperor remembered that his own mother was still living in the palace. He decided to perform a public blood test to prove their kinship, and so I added clear oil to the water. The Empress Dowager was completely stunned to see the 2 drops of blood fail to merge. She looked at the emperor with suspicion, and then at the battered and bruised prince. Then, she let out a shriek and fainted on the spot. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the Empress Dowager. He never got a second chance to perform the blood test with her. I suppose it is a case of everyone kicking a man when he is down. Then something even worse happened. The Turks, who have been enemies of the dynasty for a century, intervened. They claimed the emperor was one of their agents. They alleged that the emperor provided them with the defense plans for this battle. Of course, they only said this to muddy the waters and to watch the chaos unfold, but the ministers believed every word of it. Why would an emperor betray his own soldiers? What possible motive could he have? He'd want to claim he was trying to frame my father, to seize military power. But even if he said that, he still wouldn't have a leg to stand on. In a flash of inspiration, he suddenly remembered that this lousy idea came from Lin Wanyin. Naturally, he wouldn't blame himself for ordering and carrying it out. He would simply dump all the blame onto Lin Wanyin. He had Lin Wanyin arrested and told the ministers that it was all Lin Wanyin's scheme. She was a spy. He claimed he was upholding justice over family ties and ordered the execution of Lin Wanyin and her bastard child. Lin Wanyin had already fallen from heaven to earth, and now she was dragged straight into the abyss. This time, she finally lost all fighting spirit. She knew she couldn't escape the fate of death today, so she let out a loud laugh and admitted she was a spy. But at the same time, she pointed the finger at the emperor. She claimed the emperor was her accomplice. Otherwise, why would the emperor have followed her orders to frame the great general and his own men? Everyone had seen it. She had almost been the empress after all. The emperor almost broke down, pointing at Lin Wanyin's nose. No, that is not true at all. Lin Wanyin looked at him with a sorrowful, piercing gaze and suddenly began to laugh. Yes, everything was my doing alone, Mingsheng. I will always protect you. Having said that, she threw herself against a pillar and died, leaving nothing behind but a mess of gore, and the emperor, The emperor found it even harder to clear his name. My father arrived with a 150,000-strong army to demand this dubious emperor confess and abdicate. He was furious, but facing 150,000 troops, he had absolutely no power to resist. He decided to prove his innocence with his own death. Of course, not a real death. He poisoned himself, but he had an antidote hidden with his confidant, just waiting for his death to prove his identity before taking the antidote. But I swapped his poison, worried that wasn't enough. I also swapped his antidote. Neither of those things was what he thought. The other one was also a deadly poison. So, he actually died. Before he died, he stared at that vial in disbelief. My antidote. Who switched my antidote? I don't want to die yet. His two final exclamations made his act of dying to prove his loyalty seem less genuine. Now, everyone is still confused about who the real emperor was. That surviving prince said. He didn't want to be emperor either. He only came back to pay his respects to the late emperor. It would be better to find one of the late emperor's other descendants from the royal clan to take the throne. At least that child would truly be of the late emperor's bloodline. And so, with my father's recommendation, I became the Empress Dowager and began raising the young emperor. The original imperial consorts were given a large sum of money and released from the palace. They entered the palace voluntarily in the first place, so leaving now was also entirely their own choice. As for those children, I sent them far away. The innocent should not suffer. They will grow up safe and sound, but only as commoners. The former Empress Dowager became a nun. She was heartbroken over the deceased emperor, yet she couldn't figure out which one was her real son. So, she decided to cut all ties with the secular world. From then on, she renamed herself Moko. In the end, my father took my two brothers and returned to the frontier, this time with sufficient provisions. He dealt a crushing defeat to the Yijie, successfully reclaiming the cities that belonged to us. Amidst the sounds of celebration, I held the young emperor the little emperor who only wanted to eat rice cakes, and let out a long sigh. Well, looks like it is time to rest and recover now.